Picture this. It is April 1241. You are standing in a field of mud and crushed grass, but the ground is red. Around you lie the bodies of Europe's finest heavy cavalry, stripped of their armor, left to rot under the pale spring sun. But as you look closer, your stomach violently turns. Every single corpse is missing its head, and it gets worse. You watch a line of men in leather and furs, moving methodically through the carnage. They are not looting silver or gold. They hold bloody knives, bending over the severed necks of your brothers, your fathers, your king, and slicing off their right ears. They toss them into massive canvas bags, one by one, plop, plop, plop. By the time they are done, they will have filled 9 massive sacks with human ears, a macabre trophy of the Battle of Legnica, bound for the Mongol capital of Karakoram, to prove that the European knights were nothing but cattle to the slaughter. You realize in this paralyzing moment that you are not fighting an army, you are fighting an apocalypse. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. For nearly half a century, those 9 sacks of ears haunted the nightmares of a fractured continent. The Mongols had come, they had burned the world to the ground, and then, inexplicably, they had vanished back into the eastern steppes. But the terror never really left. Every time the wind howled through the Carpathian Mountains, the people of Poland looked over their shoulders. They waited. They knew the apocalypse would return. And in the freezing winter of 1287, the wind finally brings them the scent of smoke and horses. The Golden Horde is back. Fast forward 46 years from that field of headless corpses. Poland is a broken realm, fractured into rival duchies, a geopolitical chew toy for anyone with enough swords. The Golden Horde, now a massive semi-independent empire ruling over the vast Russian steppes, looks at this fragmented kingdom and licks its lips. Leading the charge are 2 of the most ruthless warlords of the age. Nogai Khan, a cunning and scarred veteran who operates as the true puppet master of the Horde, and Talabuga, the ambitious reigning Khan who wants to wash his reign in European blood. They are not coming for a quick raid. They are coming to finish the job their grandfathers started. They plan to drag Poland back into the Dark Ages, reduce its cities to ash, and harvest another generation of ears. They assemble a colossal invasion force, tens of thousands of hardened steppe warriors, siege engineers, and light cavalry, a war machine that has never tasted true defeat on an open field. They bring thousands of composite bows capable of punching through chainmail at 100 paces. They bring a hunger for slaves, planning to depopulate the Polish countryside and sell its inhabitants in the flesh markets of the East. As they cross the frozen borders into Polish territory, they are utterly arrogant. They expect the same terrified, uncoordinated peasants. They expect wooden walls that burn easily and heavy knights who tire quickly in the mud. They ride with the absolute certainty that history is about to repeat itself. But Nogai and Talabuga are making a fatal miscalculation. They are assuming that trauma only creates victims. They do not realize that sometimes terror is a forge. The Poland they are marching into is not the Poland of 1241. A new generation has grown up in the shadow of that massacre, and they have spent every waking moment preparing for this exact winter. The Mongols are marching in, expecting a slaughterhouse, completely unaware that they are actually stepping into a meticulously designed meat grinder. The nightmare has returned, but this time the prey is waiting in the dark with a knife. The year is 1287, and the temperature is plummeting. If you stand on the eastern borders of Poland, the wind biting through your woolen cloak, you do not hear the sound of approaching doom right away. You feel it, a low, rhythmic tremor vibrating through the frozen mud. It is the synchronized hoofbeats of over 30,000 steppe ponies. The Golden Horde is not merely marching, they are flowing across the landscape like a dark, freezing river. At the head of this massive vanguard ride, two men who view the world not as a map of nations, but as a sprawling hunting ground waiting to be bled dry. First, there is Nogai Khan. He is an old, scarred predator, missing an eye from a previous war, his face weathered into thick leather by decades of violent steppe wind. He is the kingmaker, the ruthless puppet master of the horde, a man who dictates the rise and fall of empires entirely from the saddle. Riding near him, though shrouded in mutual paranoia and distrust, is Talabuga, the reigning Khan. Talabuga is desperate for a legacy. He needs a grand, bloody conquest to legitimize his fragile rule, to prove to his cutthroat generals that he possesses the true DNA of Genghis. Together they have assembled a veteran army explicitly designed to dismantle Eastern Europe. They choose winter, intentionally. To a Western European knight, winter is the season to stay by the hearth, a time when warfare grinds to an absolute halt because supply lines freeze and heavy war horses starve in the snow. To the Mongols, winter is the ultimate tactical weapon. The freezing temperatures harden the impassable muddy marshes into solid highways. The deep, rushing rivers that usually block their path become flat, polished plains of ice, allowing their swift cavalry to bypass traditional geographical choke points with terrifying speed. They rely on the sheer, brutal resilience of their shaggy ponies, animals capable of digging through deep snow with their hooves to find frozen grass. They believe the weather itself works for them, but beneath this tactical brilliance lies a fatal, blinding arrogance. The commanders of the Golden Horde are operating on severely outdated intelligence. They remember the glorious stories of 1241. They pass around tales of the first invasion around their campfires, laughing at how easily the heavy European cavalry exhausted themselves charging at shadows. They joke about how the lumbering Polish knights were shot full of arrows until they resembled helpless iron porcupines. In the minds of the Mongol commanders, the Polish defenders are slow, stupid, and fatally predictable. Furthermore, they remember the Polish cities as nothing more than glorified wooden palisades. Throw a few fire arrows over the timber wall, wait for the inevitable panic, and ride down the fleeing survivors in the smoke. It is a mathematical formula of destruction that has never failed them. Confident in their impending slaughter, Nogai and Talabuga make their first strategic decision. They divide their massive army. It is a classic Mongol maneuver meant to paralyze the enemy with multiple simultaneous crises. Talabuga takes the northern column, a swirling mass of archers and light cavalry, aiming his spearhead straight at the wealthy city of Sandomierz. Nogai takes the southern column, driving his veteran warriors toward the political and cultural heart of the realm, Krakow. The plan is brutally simple. Sweep the countryside clean like a scythe, burn the villages, herd the surviving peasants into massive slave columns, and march them back to the flesh markets of the Crimea. They plan to leave Poland a smouldering, empty graveyard. As they cross the frozen frontier, the men of the Golden Horde sharpen their curved blades and string their composite bows, eagerly anticipating the familiar symphony of screams and burning thatch. They expect to find a chaotic, panicked countryside with isolated garrisons desperately trying to organize a pathetic defense. They expect easy meat. Instead, as the vanguard pushes deeper into Polish territory, they find absolutely nothing. The villages are abandoned, the fields are completely stripped bare of grain, the livestock is gone, there are no stragglers to slaughter, no food to steal, no terrified peasants to capture. The air is thick with a strange, heavy silence, broken only by the howling wind and the crunch of their own horses stepping on the frozen earth. The Mongols ride confidently through a desolate wasteland, completely unaware that their enemy has simply removed the board from the game. They are marching straight into the jaws of an invisible trap, driven by an arrogance that is about to permanently freeze in their veins. The empty fields and abandoned villages that the Mongols are currently riding through are not the result of blind panic. They are the result of a cold, calculated, and deeply paranoid blueprint drawn up by one man. His name is Leszek the Black, the High Duke of Poland. If you look at the chronicles of the era, you will not find a fairy tale king. Leszek is not a knight in shining armor riding out to meet the enemy in an open field of glory. He is a hardened survivor, infected by the generational trauma of his ancestors, and he possesses a grim, almost psychotic obsession with a single building material: stone. Leszek grew up breathing the phantom smoke of the first invasion. He spent his life dissecting the tactics of the Golden Horde, understanding exactly why his grandfathers were slaughtered. The Polish cities of the early 13th century were essentially giant wooden tinderboxes, protected only by timber palisades and packed earth. To a Mongol siege engineer, a wooden wall is not a barrier, it is just a bonfire waiting for a spark. The Mongols would simply hurl naphtha and flaming pitch over the timber, wait for the defenders to choke on the smoke, and butcher them as they fled the burning gates. Leszek knew that if he fought the Mongols on their terms, his kingdom would be erased from the map. So, years before the first Mongol scout even crossed the frozen border, Leszek the Black initiates one of the most frantic and grueling construction campaigns in Eastern European history. He looks at his capital, the wealthy city of Krakow, and the vital stronghold of Sandomierz, and he orders their defences completely gutted. Every wooden palisade, every timber watchtower, every flammable weakness is ripped out of the ground. In their place, he commands the earth to be deeply trenched and filled with massive blocks of limestone and granite. This is not a project of convenience. This is an era of pure, agonizing physical labor. Tens of thousands of peasants are conscripted into this backbreaking work. They drag enormous boulders from the quarries using nothing but frayed ropes, wooden rollers, and the sheer brute force of human and animal muscle. The national treasury is bled dry to pay for master European masons to design the architecture. The laborers complain bitterly. They exhaust themselves in the freezing mud. Their hands are crushed under the weight of the heavy masonry. But Leszek is completely deaf to their pleas. He is driven by the terrifying absolute certainty that a crushed hand today is better than a severed head tomorrow. Slowly, the geometry of Polish survival violently changes. The flimsy wooden fences are replaced by towering, impenetrable curtain walls made of solid rock. These are not merely walls, they are meticulously designed medieval meat grinders. Leszek orders the excavation of deep, treacherous moats that completely neutralize the mobility of steppe cavalry. He razes towering stone keeps that provide overlapping lethal fields of fire for heavy crossbowmen. He replaces the vulnerable wooden gates with narrow, fortified choke points backed by heavy iron grates that drop down like guillotines. He transforms his cities from soft targets into unforgiving, man-made mountains. Most importantly, Leszek rewrites the military doctrine of his people, completely abandoning the foolish pride of medieval chivalry. He issues a kingdom-wide directive: When the Mongols arrive, no one is to ride out. There will be no glorious cavalry charges on the open plains. Instead, the peasants are ordered to strip the countryside bare. Every grain of wheat, every scrap of meat, every barrel of clean water is dragged behind these new, impenetrable stone shields. Leszek the Black has built an anvil. He has created a defensive network specifically designed to weaponize the one enemy the Golden Horde cannot outrun, which is time. He knows the Mongol war machine is a living organism that must constantly consume resources to survive. By locking the food behind walls that cannot catch fire, he intends to let the winter do his killing for him. As the commanders of the Golden Horde push their columns deeper into the dead Polish countryside, they are eagerly looking for the wooden cities of their grandfathers. They have absolutely no idea that the rules of the game have been permanently rewritten in stone. Stand on the freshly mortared battlements of Sandomierz. Look down at the frozen plains below. The horizon is entirely black, crawling with the vanguard of Talabuga's army. They do not set up a formal camp. They do not send emissaries to demand your surrender. They operate on the assumption of absolute terror. You watch as thousands of light cavalrymen spur their horses forward, screaming battle cries that have shattered empires from China to Persia. The sky suddenly darkens as a massive volley of arrows arcs upward, trailing thick, oily black smoke. It is the signature opening move of the Golden Horde. Fire from the sky, panic in the streets, slaughter at the gates. But then something unprecedented happens. The arrows hit the walls, and they simply bounce off. There is no dry timber to catch the sparks. There are no thatched roofs hanging over the parapets. The flaming pitch splatters harmlessly against solid, freezing limestone, sizzling out in the snow. The Mongol archers, trained to shoot a bird out of the sky at a full gallop, unleash volley after volley, trying to find the gaps in the timber. But there is no timber. Their armor-piercing arrows, designed to punch through chainmail and flesh, strike the granite blocks and violently shatter into useless splinters. For the first time in their lives, the unstoppable warriors of the steppe are throwing themselves against a mountain, and the mountain does not care. Down below, confusion begins to ripple through the Mongol ranks. Talabuga watches from a distance, his anticipation turning into a cold, creeping frustration. This is not the script. The city is supposed to be burning by now. The gates are supposed to be buckling. He orders his siege engineers forward, commanding them to bring up the battering rams and the scaling ladders. But as the engineers charge through the snow, they hit the second phase of Leszek the Black's brutal trap. The moats. Before the Mongols can even touch the stone, they plunge into deep, jagged trenches filled with freezing water, sharpened stakes, and crushed ice. The lethal momentum of the cavalry charge is instantly neutralized. They are stuck in the mud, thrashing in the freezing water, desperately trying to plant their wooden ladders against a wall that is perfectly smooth and aggressively tall. And that is when you, standing on the battlements, return fire. You do not use bows. You use heavy, wind-up European crossbows. These are not weapons of finesse. They are mechanical engines of death. You place the heavy iron bolt in the groove, crank the winch, aim down at the dense mass of struggling Mongols, and pull the trigger. The physics are devastating. The heavy, steel-tipped bolt travels with so much kinetic energy that it punches straight through the thick, boiled leather armor of the Mongol vanguard. It pins men to their own siege ladders. It shatters collarbones and collapses lungs. The overlapping fields of fire designed by the European masons create a brutal kill zone. There are no blind spots. Every angle is covered by a relentless hail of iron bolts and heavy rocks dropped from the battlements above. The assault on Sandomierz quickly devolves from a glorious conquest into a senseless meat grinder. The Mongols are taking catastrophic casualties, bleeding out in the freezing mud, achieving absolutely nothing. Talabuga realizes with mounting horror that his fast, mobile army is fundamentally incompatible with this new, industrialized form of defensive warfare. He does not have the massive, counterweight trebuchets required to crack solid stone. He does not have the months required to starve the city out because his own army is the one standing in the bare snow. Frustrated and humiliated, Talabuga pulls his battered forces back. The exact same scenario plays out to the south, where Nogai Khan throws his veteran warriors against the towering defences of Krakow, only to watch them die in droves beneath the impenetrable walls of Wawel Castle. The terrifying illusion of Mongol invincibility shatters against the limestone. They cannot burn the cities, they cannot climb the walls, and most importantly, they cannot reach the food locked inside. The Golden Horde is stuck outside in the cold, and the temperature is dropping rapidly. To understand the sheer horror of what happens next, you have to understand the anatomy of the Mongol war machine. It is not a traditional army, it is a biological engine of mass destruction. A European army marches on its stomach, relying on slow, lumbering supply wagons that bog down in the mud. The Golden Horde despises supply wagons. They are the ultimate parasites. They move with terrifying speed because they carry almost nothing. They live entirely off the land they invade, stripping it like a swarm of heavily armed locusts. They eat the peasants' grain, they slaughter the peasants' livestock, and they use the peasants themselves as human shields. But Leszek the Black has effectively sterilized the host. There is no grain, there is no livestock, there is only a frozen wasteland of blackened earth and impenetrable stone. For the first few weeks, the Mongol discipline holds. They are hardened men born in the unforgiving steppes. They know how to suffer. When the rations run out, they resort to their traditional survival tactic. They open a small vein in the neck of their shaggy steppe ponies, drink a few mouthfuls of hot blood, patch the wound, and keep riding. It is a brilliant, brutal system that has kept them alive from China to Hungary. But the Polish winter of 1287 is not a normal winter. It is a meteorological nightmare. The temperature drops so violently that the rivers freeze solid to the riverbed. A thick, impenetrable crust of ice forms over the snow. The famed steppe ponies, animals genetically engineered to dig through snow to find dead grass, violently shatter their hooves against the ice. They cannot graze, and a starving horse cannot bleed for its rider. The death of the horses is the beginning of the end. For a Mongol warrior, his horse is his legs, his weapon, his lifeline. Without it, he is just a man standing in a frozen field, heavily burdened by leather armor that is slowly freezing to his skin. As the weeks drag on outside the impenetrable walls of Krakow and Sandomierz, the reality of their situation sets in. They are not besieging the Polish are besieging them. The defenders are sitting behind thick stone walls, huddled around warm hearths, eating the very grain the Mongols desperately need. The invaders are trapped out in the open, fully exposed to the screaming razor-sharp winds howling off the Carpathian mountains. Frostbite begins to tear through the Mongol camps like a silent plague. It starts in the extremities. Toes turn white, then grey, then a rotting, necrotic black. Fingers, the exact same fingers needed to draw a heavy composite bow, stiffen and die. The weapons that made them the masters of the world become completely useless. You cannot feel the bowstring when your nerve endings are dead. You cannot swing a curved saber when your muscles are locked in rigorous, shivering spasms. Panic, a completely alien emotion to the veterans of the Golden Horde, begins to spread. They start butchering their dying horses, desperate for meat, fighting each other like feral dogs over the raw, freezing scraps. They burn their own siege equipment, the wooden ladders and catapults they dragged hundreds of miles just to have a few hours of warmth. The great, invincible encampment of Talabuga Khan descends into a wretched, starving slum of dying men. Every morning, the Mongol officers walk through the snowdrifts, counting the stiff, frozen corpses of men who simply went to sleep and never woke up. The psychological damage is catastrophic. These warriors believed they were the designated punishment of God. They believed it was their divine right to conquer the world. Now they are being humiliated by a stationary enemy and slowly executed by the weather. Talabuga watches his magnificent army dissolving into a rabble of starving beggars. He knows he cannot stay. He knows the siege is broken. But retreating through a frozen, hostile country with starving men and exhausted horses is a death sentence. The hunters have officially become the hunted. They are completely pinned down by the ice, starving in the dark, entirely unaware that the final phase of Leszek the Black's trap is about to spring. While the Golden Horde slowly freezes to death in the mud outside the walls of Krakow, step inside the city. The contrast is almost insulting. You are standing in a fortress packed to the rafters with salted meat, dried grain, and firewood. The Polish defenders are not huddled in terror. They are standing on the battlements, their stomachs full, watching the greatest military machine on earth reduced to eating its own dead horses. But Leszek the Black is not a man who simply waits for his enemy to die of natural causes. He is a predator who understands that a wounded animal is still dangerous. He knows that if the weather breaks or if Talabuga manages to rally his starving horde, the siege could drag on for years. Leszek wants to end this now. He does not just want to survive the Golden Horde, he wants to exterminate them. So, in the dead of winter, under the cover of a blinding snowstorm, Leszek does something that completely violates the traditional rules of a siege. He leaves. He does not flee out of cowardice. He takes a small, elite guard of heavy cavalry, opens a hidden sally port in the dead of night, and violently cuts his way through the freezing, emaciated Mongol picket lines. Before the frozen sentries can even sound the alarm, Leszek and his men are gone, swallowed by the howling black blizzard. They ride south, pushing their massive war horses through the treacherous, ice-choked passes of the Carpathian Mountains. It is a suicidal journey. The winds up here can strip the heat from a man's body in minutes, freezing the fluid right inside his lungs. But Leszek is driven by pure, unadulterated vengeance. He crosses the border and rides down into the Kingdom of Hungary, a nation that has its own deep, bloody vendetta against the Mongols. He rides straight to the court of King Ladislaus IV. Leszek does not beg for help. He offers a very specific, very lucrative proposition. He tells the Hungarian king that the invincible Golden Horde is currently trapped in Poland, starving, freezing, and entirely vulnerable. He is not asking for an army to fight a war. He is inviting the Hungarians to a slaughter. Ladislaus recognizes the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He immediately dispatches a massive relief force led by a brilliant, utterly ruthless tactician named George Baksa. Baksa is not a traditional chivalric knight obsessed with honor. He is a hardened veteran of Eastern warfare. He has fought steppe nomads before. He knows their tricks, their feigned retreats, their psychological warfare. And more importantly, he knows exactly how to dismantle them. He gathers thousands of Hungarian heavy cavalrymen, heavily armored infantry, and mercenary crossbowmen. They forge a terrifying combined force, joining up with Leszek's remaining Polish knights, who have been quietly mustering in the southern provinces. This new army begins its march north, back toward the freezing plains of Poland. They are not moving with the slow, cumbersome logistics of a typical medieval campaign. They are moving with the swift, lethal purpose of an executioner's axe. They are heavily armored, well-fed, and deeply motivated by the memory of the burning cities of their youth. The Hungarian warhorses are massive, grain-fed beasts, a terrifying contrast to the dying skeletal ponies of the Mongol invaders. Meanwhile, back in Poland, the Mongol commanders are entirely blind to the impending doom. Talabuga and Nogai are still struggling to keep their mutinous, starving men alive in the snow. They are so focused on the impenetrable stone walls of the Polish cities that they have completely neglected their rear guard. They have broken the absolute cardinal rule of steppe warfare by remaining stationary for too long in hostile territory. As the combined Polish and Hungarian heavy cavalry crests the southern ridges, their armor gleaming dully under the grey winter sky, they do not blow horns or announce their arrival. They simply lock their steel visors, lower their heavy ash lances, and prepare to deliver a fatal blow to the spine of the Golden Horde. The trap Leszek the Black built is finally snapping shut, and the Mongols are about to discover what happens when the prey brings its own teeth to the fight. While the main body of the Golden Horde rots outside the stone walls of Krakow, a desperate detachment breaks off and heads south. The Mongol commanders are starving, humiliated, and losing control of their freezing men. They desperately need a victory, but more importantly, they need food. Their scouts bring back rumors of a target nestled near the Hungarian border, a town and a convent called Stary Soch. To the freezing steppe warriors, it sounds like salvation. It is not a sprawling modern stone fortress. It is an older settlement rumored to be packed with hoarded grain, panicked refugees, and defenseless nuns. It is the soft, bleeding underbelly of the kingdom they have been searching for since they crossed the border. Salivating at the prospect of a traditional massacre and a hot meal, a massive column of Mongol cavalry turns its skeletal horses toward the south. But to reach Stary Soch, you cannot simply ride in a straight line across an open plain. You have to navigate the treacherous, jagged foothills of the Carpathian Mountains. You have to march through the Dunajec River Valley. If you are a Mongol officer born on the infinite flat horizons of the Eurasian steppe, a valley is nothing more than a road with incredibly tall walls. You are completely blind to the geological danger. You do not realize that the steep, heavily forested slopes rising violently on either side of the turbulent Dunajec River are creating a natural funnel. As the Mongol detachment pushes deeper into the valley, the terrain aggressively begins to dictate their every movement. The wide, sweeping formations that allow steppe cavalry to outflank and envelop their enemies are physically impossible here. The narrow valley floor forces the massive column to squeeze tightly together. It compresses thousands of horses and riders into a dense, sluggish, claustrophobic mass. The muddy, half-frozen banks of the river offer absolutely no solid footing, causing the exhausted horses to slip and break their legs in the icy sludge. With every step they take into the gorge, the Mongols are being systematically stripped of their greatest tactical asset, their terrifying hypermobility. And standing at the end of that gorge, waiting for them in the freezing mist, is not a terrified garrison of peasant conscripts. It is George Baksa, Leszek the Black, and the vanguard of the Hungarian-Polish relief force. They have force-marched through the mountain passes and arrived exactly where they needed to be, precisely when they needed to be there. Baksa sits on his massive, grain-fed warhorse, looking down the valley at the approaching Mongol column. He sees an executioner's absolute dream. He does not need to outmaneuver this enemy. He does not need to outsmart them. He just needs to plug the drain. Baksa aggressively deploys his heavy cavalry right across the narrowest point of the choke point. He creates a solid, impenetrable wall of steel plate, heavy chainmail, and lowered ash lances, completely blocking the only viable exit from the valley. He then positions his heavy infantry and mercenary crossbowmen high up on the elevated wooded ridges along the sides of the gorge. The trap is completely set. It is a textbook anvil, and Baksa is holding a very heavy hammer. The starving Mongol vanguard, blinded by the driving snow and their own desperation for plunder, finally sees the barricade of steel blocking their path. For a brief, terrifying second, the steppe warriors try to process the sight. This is not the broken, hiding enemy they expected. This is a highly disciplined, fully armored European army standing entirely still, daring them to advance. The Mongol officers frantically scream orders to fan out, to initiate the classic sweeping archery harassment that has won them 100 battles. But there is nowhere to fan out. On their left is a freezing, turbulent river filled with razor-sharp ice flows. On their right are steep, impassable slopes bristling with European crossbows. In front of them is a wall of lances, and behind them the rest of their own massive army is still blindly pushing forward down the narrow trail, unknowingly cramming the vanguard tighter and tighter into the kill zone. The Mongols have marched themselves directly into a geographical coffin, and George Baksa is about to violently nail the lid shut. When the charge finally comes, it does not sound like a glorious battle cry. It sounds like a mechanical avalanche. George Baksa does not order a wild, disorganized sprint. That is how you lose formation and snap your horse's legs in the hidden ice. Instead, the wall of Polish and Hungarian steel moves forward at a calculated, terrifying trot. The frozen ground violently shakes. The Mongol vanguard, trapped between the freezing river and the impassable ridges, can only watch as thousands of tons of armored muscle and iron accelerate toward them. The steppe warriors desperately try to loose their composite bows, but their fingers are black with frostbite, their bowstrings are stiff with ice, and the European knights are completely encased in overlapping steel plate, thick padded gambesons and heavy chainmail. The arrows simply glance off the approaching wall like rain hitting a tin roof. Then the gap completely closes and the brutal physics of the medieval world take over. When a 12-foot ash lance, couched under the arm of a trained knight and backed by the momentum of a massive grain-fed warhorse, strikes a starving man wearing hardened leather, it does not merely puncture him. It violently lifts him off his feet, completely shatters his ribcage, and throws his broken body backward into the horses behind him. The initial impact at the Battle of Stary Sachs is not a military engagement. It is a catastrophic industrial accident. The entire front line of the Mongol vanguard is instantly vaporized, trampled into the freezing mud under iron-shod hooves. The Polish knights do not even need to draw their broadswords right away. The sheer kinetic energy of the charge acts like a colossal hammer, striking a steel wedge into a block of rotten, freezing wood. Panic, raw, and entirely unfiltered, rips through the ranks of the Golden Horde. The men at the front try desperately to retreat, to turn their skeletal ponies around and flee from the advancing meat grinder. But they cannot move an inch. The back of their own massive column, completely blind to the slaughter happening at the front, is still stubbornly pushing forward down the narrow valley trail. The Mongols are literally crushing each other to death. Men and horses are squeezed so tightly together in the bottleneck that they physically cannot raise their arms to swing their curved sabers. They are paralyzed. And that is exactly when the sky above them turns black. From the elevated, heavily wooded ridges on either side of the gorge, Baksa's mercenary crossbowmen open fire. They do not even have to aim. The valley floor is packed shoulder to shoulder with screaming, terrified targets. The heavy iron quarrels rain down in devastating rhythmic volleys, punching straight through the dense mob, pinning riders to their saddles and horses to the frozen earth. There is absolutely nowhere to hide. The valley has become a perfectly designed, inescapable kill box. desperate to escape the relentless hail of iron from above and the advancing wall of lances from the front. Hundreds of Mongol warriors drive their horses to the left, plunging blindly into the Dunajec River. But the water is a freezing, turbulent nightmare choked with jagged, floating ice flows. The exhausted steppe ponies are immediately swept away by the violent current. The thick winter furs and leather armor of the riders soak up the freezing water like a sponge, pulling the invincible warriors of the steppe straight down to the riverbed. They drown in the dark, gasping for air, crushed between massive slabs of shifting ice. Down on the valley floor, the slaughter continues without a single ounce of mercy. George Baxter and his men push deeper and deeper into the chaotic mass, discarding their splintered lances and drawing heavy broadswords, warhammers, and maces. They systematically butcher the trapped detachment. The pristine white snow turns into a thick, steaming slurry of mud, shattered weapons, and blood. For decades, the Golden Horde had relied on the absolute psychological terror of their reputation to win battles before swords were even drawn. But in the freezing mud of Starry Sachs, that towering reputation is physically hacked to pieces. As the screams echo off the valley walls, the Mongols realize with absolute horror that they are no longer the apex predators of the known world. They are just meat, and the European butchers have finally arrived to collect the toll. The news of the massacre at Stary Sonch does not arrive at the main Mongol camp with a formal messenger. It arrives as a horrifying, undeniable absence. Talabuga and Nogai Khan sit freezing outside the impenetrable walls of Krakow, waiting for the grain and plunder their southern detachment was supposed to bring back. Instead, they get nothing but silence. Then a few half-frozen, bleeding survivors finally stumble out of the blizzards, their eyes wide with a madness that only absolute slaughter can induce. They whisper of a valley of death. They speak of armored giants on massive horses, of a river choked with Mongol corpses, and of a trap they could not escape. For the first time in the history of the Golden Horde, a terrifying realization paralyzes the leadership. You are not the hunters anymore. You are the prey, and the entire country is closing in for the kill. Talabuga gives the only order he has left: retreat. But retreating through the Polish winter is not a military maneuver. It is a prolonged, agonizing execution. To escape back to the eastern steppes, the battered remnants of the Golden Horde must drag themselves south, straight through the jagged, unforgiving passes of the Carpathian Mountains. You are no longer a proud warrior of the steppe. You are a starving, frostbitten fugitive, waist-deep in snow, dragging your rotting feet through a white hell. The legendary discipline of the Mongol army completely disintegrates. It is every man for himself in the freezing dark. But the winter is not the only thing waiting for you in the mountains. As you push your exhausted body up the narrow, icy trails, you get the chilling sensation that you are being watched. You look up at the towering, snow-covered ridges. There, standing silently among the frozen pines, are the Gorale, the Polish Highlanders. These are not the heavily armored knights of George Baxter. These are feral mountain men clad in thick, greasy sheepskins, armed with crude axes, hunting bows, and a generational hatred for anyone trespassing on their peaks. They know every blind corner, every hidden cave, and every unstable snowbank in the Carpathians. To them, your retreating army is nothing but a long, slow-bleeding wound, and they are the salt. The Goral do not offer a pitched battle. They fight a brutal, invisible guerrilla war. As your column squeezes through a narrow gorge, the Highlanders strike. They trigger massive, man-made avalanches, sending hundreds of tons of snow, jagged ice, and massive boulders crashing down onto the trail. The roar is deafening. In seconds, hundreds of Mongol warriors are swept off the cliffs, screaming as they plummet into the dark ravines below. When the survivors try to scramble over the debris, the Highlanders rain down arrows from the high ground, picking off the officers and the strongest men. If you fall behind to rest your freezing legs, the Goral descend from the shadows, slitting your throat in the snow and vanishing before your blood even stops steaming. Driven to absolute madness by the relentless ambushes and the plunging temperatures, the Golden Horde crosses a horrifying psychological threshold. The horses have been dead for weeks, the leather armor has been boiled and chewed to paste. There is nothing left to consume. As you huddle around a pathetic smoky fire in the dead of night, you look at the man sitting across from you. He is dying of frostbite. You do not see a brother in arms anymore. You see meat. The chronicles of the era whisper of the darkest taboo. Driven by the agonizing hollow in their stomachs, the remnants of the invincible Mongol army resort to cannibalism. They butcher their own freezing dead in the snowdrifts, eating human flesh just to survive another night in the Polish mountains. The retreat becomes a grotesque parade of the walking dead. Tens of thousands of hardened steppe warriors entered Poland, carrying the arrogant belief that they were the masters of the world. Now they are leaving it as frozen statues, their bones picked clean by wolves and Highlanders. The Carpathian Mountains swallow the Golden Horde whole, turning their glorious invasion into a graveyard of ice. The physical destruction is absolute, but the psychological destruction is the true victory. Picture this. It is the spring of 1288. The most brutal winter in living memory has finally broken, and the heavy snows of the Carpathian Mountains are beginning to violently melt. But as the white blanket recedes, it does not reveal fresh green grass or budding spring flowers. It reveals a sprawling, thawing graveyard. Tens of thousands of corpses are slowly emerging from the ice. The deep Polish mud is quietly swallowing the rotting remnants of the Golden Horde. The apocalyptic war machine that once leveled cities from Beijing to Kiev, a force that considered itself the divine punishment of God, is now dragging its frostbitten, starving survivors back toward the eastern steppes. Nogai Khan and Talabuga do not return as conquering gods of war, parading sacks of severed ears. They limp home as humiliated, broken fugitives. The terrifying aura of Mongol invincibility, the single greatest psychological weapon of the 13th century, lies permanently shattered beneath the limestone walls of Krakow and buried deep in the freezing gorges of Stary Sącz. This is the bloody, undeniable price of absolute arrogance. The Third Mongol invasion of Poland is not defeated by a massive unified European coalition. It is not defeated by a miraculous stroke of divine intervention or sheer luck. It is defeated because one paranoid, visionary man, Leszek the Black, understood a cold, unforgiving truth of medieval survival. When you are facing an unstoppable meat grinder, you do not offer it your neck. You break the machine from the inside out. You fundamentally change the physical laws of the battlefield. By ruthlessly tearing down the vulnerable wooden palisades of his grandfathers and erecting massive, impenetrable limestone fortresses, Leszek completely neutralized the Mongols' absolute reliance on fire and terror. By enforcing a draconian scorched earth policy, dragging every single ounce of grain and livestock behind those stone walls, he weaponized the one thing the steppe warriors could not outrun, their own starving stomachs. And by funneling the fastest, most mobile light cavalry on earth into a claustrophobic, freezing river valley, the Polish and Hungarian defenders stripped the Mongols of their vital speed, turning them into stationary, helpless targets for heavy steel lances and falling rocks. The commanders of the Golden Horde marched into Poland expecting to find the same terrified, disorganized victims their grandfathers had effortlessly slaughtered in 12 1241. They expected history to be a comfortable, predictable loop of burning thatch and screaming peasants. Instead, they walked blindly into a meticulously engineered slaughterhouse where every howling winter wind, every frozen riverbed, and every jagged mountain pass was turned into a lethal, invisible weapon against them. The Polish people did not fight the Mongols on the open plains. They weaponized their own brutal climate to exterminate them. The aftermath of this savage winter campaign permanently altered the geopolitical reality of Eastern Europe. Poland would never again act as the helpless, bleeding chew toy of the Golden Horde. The generational trauma of the first invasion was finally avenged in the freezing mud, paid for with the lives of tens of thousands of steppe warriors. The blueprint for survival had been written in blood, shattered arrows, and the starved carcasses of horses. The nightmare was truly over, not because the monster had suddenly learned mercy, but because the prey had finally learned how to forge iron teeth. If you found value in this gritty story of survival and tactical brilliance, please subscribe to the channel. We are building a library of history's most incredible forgotten moments, and I want you to be part of it. And I have a question for you to answer in the comments below. What do you think was the fatal flaw of the Golden Horde in 1288? Was it their blind arrogance, the brutal weather, or entirely the genius of Leszek the Black? Let me know your thoughts down below. I read every comment. If you want to dive deeper into the tactics of medieval warfare, click the video on your screen right now to see how another impossible battle changed history. Until next time, remember, history isn't just about the past, it's a bloody warning for the future.